After the president was impeached for a second time, the White House released a new video on Twitter of Mr. Trump speaking out more forcefully against the violence displayed at the U.S. Capitol by his supporters last week. Here's a clip.
Mob violence goes against everything I believe in and everything our movement stands for. No true supporter of mine could ever endorse political violence. America is a nation of laws. Those who engaged in the attacks last week will be brought to justice.
Of course, we have video of President Trump's supporters at the Capitol saying that they were there because the president asked them to be there. Mr. Trump made no reference to becoming the first president in the nation's history to be impeached twice. And while he contended that there will be a smooth transition of power next week, he still did not mention President-elect Joe Biden by name. For more, let's bring in CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid. So, Paula, in that White House video, the president condemned the violence at the Capitol last week, but did not take any responsibility at all in inciting the insurrection on the Capitol.
That's exactly right, Vlad. And what's interesting is before the impeachment vote, he also released a paper statement. It read much like many of his tweets have over the past several years. He insists that there be no more violence, no law breaking, no vandalism of any kind. He said that's not what he stands for. That is not what America stands for. After the vote, we got this video. Now, this was President Trump on message, on teleprompter. This was a message that was carefully crafted to try to distance him from any forthcoming violence. But as you noted, he took no responsibility for the unprecedented and deadly attack on our Capitol last week. These messages come a week after the fact, and they are a significant contrast to the message he released last week, where he, quote, told the rioters he loved them, they were very special, and he felt their pain regarding the, quote unquote, stolen election.
Yes. A week later, we got this message. And, you know, what you heard was sort of the beginning of the message. The tail end of the message talks about freedom of speech, censorship, some of the other things that we've heard the president talk about before that certainly his supporters kind of perk up. So in regards to what he said at the Save America rally prior to the violence last Wednesday, that's going to be sort of part of the key focus of a Senate trial if that occurs. I want to play some of that sound.
You'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong. We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen. You don't concede when there's theft involved.
So, you know, the president has spoken about those words in particular, and he called them totally appropriate. He hasn't said, I didn't rile people up, I didn't give them just, you know, the directive to do that. He said, you know, many people have looked at those words, that speech, and it is totally appropriate. When it comes to a Senate trial, certainly those words, those specific words will be looked at, but that's not all that would be looked at in terms of presenting evidence.
That's right. Look, anything you say can and will be used against you. And when we look specifically at those remarks, I want to hone in on a few different phrases. The first one is, if you don't fight like hell, you're not going to have a country anymore. That's really one of the longest statements that he gives that are they're going to be used against him, one of the longest quotes. And it's going to be really hard for his lawyers to defend against that particular quote, particularly when he's speaking in front of a very large crowd that's clearly revved up. Many of them look poised to potentially engage in sort of confrontations, in potential acts of violence. So when you say something like that, his lawyers are going to have a tough time defending him against some of these incitement accusations. But they will likely use another phrase. They'll say, look, he also says peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard. This is something that many of his defenders have seized on to argue that he never incited the crowd. But this is at best mixed messages. And some people could also argue this was a nod and a wink. Look, on the record, I'm saying this, but you know what I really mean. And then, of course, the president specifically says, we are going to the Capitol. And while he did not physically accompany them, I think when he faces trial, this is something that is also going to be used against him. And in the totality, they will argue that, yes, he did indeed incite this crowd to go and in his defense and in his name go and conduct this attack. I mean, whether he thought that this was going to turn deadly, that's something that could be debated. But it does appear, based on this, these statements will absolutely come up again and again about these questions about whether he truly, legally incited this crowd.
Paula, take us inside the White House over the last couple of days. Does the president have a legal strategy or a defense team in preparation of this trial? Does he, under the best of times, with 7 days to go, 6 days to go in an administration, staffers are leaving, they're packing up their offices, they're heading out, they're looking at other jobs. I've got to believe that that's happening in this White House, perhaps even a little sooner than President Trump would have liked. Who's he talking to? Who's there with him?
He's quite isolated, Vlad. He's here mostly alone. He's surrounded by a small group of advisors, including his chief of staff, Mark Meadows, his son-in-law, senior advisor, Jared Kushner, and a few other top advisors. But when it comes to a legal defense, which you mentioned, it does not appear that there is any legal strategy, either by attorneys or communicators, to help defend the president against impeachment here. The lawyers who represented him in the last impeachment early last year, Jay Sekulow, his personal attorney, one of his personal attorneys, and Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel, they are not going to be involved here. Now, I've covered about half a dozen to a dozen of the president's various legal controversies, cases, and investigations. The president has a lot of lawyers of varying quality, and over the course of those, there's usually been some sort of defense that comes through, something in talking to sources that you can kind of glean about how they'll proceed. But here, it's not clear at all who is going to be defending him. While Rudy Giuliani and others may defend him in the court of public opinion, the former mayor's performance in court in terms of the election disputes would perhaps give anyone pause about having him defend a former president or current president of the United States in impeachment. It's very unclear who he's going to be defended by and what on earth they're going to say in his defense.
So Mitch McConnell, the current majority leader in the Senate, soon to be not the majority leader, he's signaled that he's not even going to begin an impeachment trial in the Senate until after the president is probably out of office and President-elect Biden has taken over. So what does this mean for Mr. Trump, being impeached as a former president?
So some people have argued that this is just about holding him accountable for his role in last week's attack. But there is something else, and that's, of course, the 2024 election. And that is something that is top of mind for these lawmakers. If the president was successfully impeached and removed, the retaliation, not the retaliation, but the consequence of that, political retaliation, would be that he could not run again for office, which would make things easier on some Republicans who have presidential aspirations in 2024. Of course, Democrats would like to see him held accountable, but there are some Republicans who are also arguing that this shouldn't go to trial, that this would overshadow the first few days of the Biden administration, perhaps the first few weeks or months, and that we need something to unify the country and that there may be other ways to pursue this. So how this pans out is unclear at this point, but President Trump, the most significant consequence for him, he's already now the only president to be impeached twice, but he could potentially be prevented from running in 2024.
All right, Paula Reid, thank you.